New Thought Media Network proudly presents the 2025 season for Nonviolence Meditation Series, January 31st through April 4th. Embrace nonviolence every day with our 64 unique video meditations. Join us at 6 a.m. Mountain Time or watch anytime on our YouTube channel. Featuring a collection of New Thought voices, the 2025 season for Nonviolence Meditation Series. Only on New Thought Media Network. January 31st through April 4th.
Hey everybody, Tracy Brown here, and it is time for the Inclusive Church. Every Tuesday at noon Mountain Time, we just take a few minutes out and play with the idea of what does it mean to be inclusive in our spiritual communities. Not so much why do we want to do that, because a lot of people have gotten a why, but the how, and what are the things to really pay attention to that may be getting in your way or maybe slowing you down. So today, we are going to be talking about the distinction between transactional activities and transformational activities. Now, before we dive into that, I'm going to say right up at the top, you want both. You need some of both. But you want to be able to understand the difference, because if you are only doing transactional activities, you're not going to get the long-term strategy that you want. And if you're only doing transformational activities, then you're going to most likely have a problem engaging people because they don't really know why they're doing the deep work that you want them to do, or they just won't sign up for it because they haven't had enough exposure. So we're going to dive into that in just a minute. I do want to mention that we always stop and say and talk about inclusive church and why I use church and not ministry or spiritual community. And it is because, number one, we are reclaiming the word church. We are not talking about a building. We are not talking about church as a piece of property. We are talking about church as a collection of people who have come together to learn, study, practice, teach, share a common spiritual belief system or faith system. And so in that regard, because we're talking about how to engage more people and how to engage people you may not have engaged before, we are talking about church as the people. And then the second thing is, you will hear me frequently say, if you're a leader in a spiritual community, or if you're a leader in a church, and when I'm saying that, I am not just talking about ministers, because as we know, ministers are great. And I do hope that every minister is a leader. But a growing community needs more than one person or three people And the folks who are giving money, the people who are volunteering, the people who are actually running meetings or teaching classes, greeting people, they are people who are leaders in your community, in your church. So having said that, let's go back and jump into this whole idea about transformational or transactional. And if you're watching live, and I can see a few of you are, because we're on Facebook, we're on LinkedIn, and we are on YouTube. Feel free to do what Anita has done and just say good afternoon. And if you have a question or an example that comes to mind as we are together, then please feel free to put that in the comments or in the chat as well. So this idea of, are the things we're doing helping us to build our spiritual community and helping us to achieve our goal of being inclusive? There are so many things that you can do, right? There are so many things you can try. And you always want to make sure that you're not over emphasizing something that is not going to help you based on where your community is in the development of being inclusive. So what's the difference between transactional and transformational? Okay, I know you could look in the dictionary and see what it says, and it would make sense to you. So, right, transactional, it's a series of transactions. You typically exchange one thing for another, or you want something and you do this thing to get it, or you pay this amount of money, or you provide this amount of information, and it's an exchange in that way. It's a transaction. Transformational, on the other hand, is you are still exchanging information or money. I may pay money to go to a week-long retreat that transforms my life because I have this in-depth experience, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the only way to have transformation. So a transformational program, activity, or initiative is one where people do, typically over a period of time, dive more deeply into either their own psyche or their own belief system in order to come out changed, or it's transformational in transforming the community because of how it's been designed and the ways that people are interacting with one another. Now, are these two things completely separate? No. And as I said, if you were here, 5 minutes ago, 6 minutes ago, you want both. So please don't think I'm saying transactional is bad and transformational is good, or vice versa. I'm saying you need them both. And you need to, based on what you're trying to achieve, decide and then design based on what you need. Oh, Wayne, you're I'm going to post that, right? The world needs more Tracy Brown. Yes. I know a few people who wouldn't agree with you, but we're all on the same page right now. And so thinking about in your spiritual community, and the communities that you interact with, the churches that you interact with, think about what has transformed you. So for many people in their spiritual community is, I've been transformed over time because I understand the philosophy, or because I've read the Bible, or I've read the Science of Mind textbook, or I've read this book. And over time of diving in, I understand it more. And then I'm applying it in my life. And as I apply it in my life, things change, and I've transformed my entire life. Right? So anything that encourages people or actually is designed for people to learn more, but then understand it, apply it in their personal life or in the life of their team, group, or club. When those things happen and then it's practiced and there's a new outcome or a new way of being, that's transformation. Does that mean it always has to take a long time? No. There are people, and you may know some people like I do, who have said, oh, my life was a mess. And then one day I finally decided I didn't want my life to be a mess anymore. And I went to a Unity church. And I cried the whole time I was there, because every time what the speaker said and the meditation, it's like in a 90-minute period, from the way they were greeted to the way they were welcomed after service and everything that happened in the service. It was a series of things going deep within, connecting to the soul, and that person was like transformed. Now, did it stick? If they kept coming, it's like it was just a continuation and a deepening. And so that makes sense, right? That they were transformed, or it was a transformational experience for them. And that's what you want to think about. Most of the time, transformation comes through a series of events or meetings or experiences. But it can happen. It can happen, especially depending on where people have been before. So that's one of the questions that you ask yourself. Is this program, initiative, event, class, is this designed to simply give people information, which is an exchange, their time for some information? Pretty much that's going to be transactional. Or are we designing this in a way to take people deep within, or if it's a group situation, to take the group deep within, and then it's designed for application to happen. And somewhere in there, probably at the beginning, there's some actual intentions, goals, or a vision that is set, so people know they are on a journey, transforming from who they were at the beginning of the journey to someone or something different. Four examples were just going through my head, but I'm only going to share one of them. And that is an example from CSL Dallas that had been doing for about 10 years a variety of events that were related to or in response to things that were happening in the world, in the nation, in the world, that reflected a consciousness of racism. And so there were some transactional things, like if there were lots of examples of a Black man being killed and opening the church to have a vigil or a prayer service. You're hurting because of this that has happened in the news. Come in and we will speak to the fact that race was a factor, and we will pray together, or we will meditate together. And the transaction happens with the intention of when you leave, you either feel better or you feel more connected to the spiritual truth so that you can navigate it. You now have a tool to help you navigate what is creating pain for you. There's nothing wrong with transaction. On the other hand, on the example of the transformational, CSL Dallas, after 10 years of doing a variety of things, many of them transactional, created an 18-hour lab where the same group of people would come together 3 hours at a time over a period of months and learn some things, yes, but also learn to apply the spiritual principles that would heal or help people navigate the consciousness that allows racism, change the consciousness for the participants so they can help change the consciousness in the world. And 8 months later, many people were transformed. Did they become experts on racism in those months? No. Did they become spokespeople for anyone who knows science of mind and wants to understand how to use spiritual principles? No. But they were individually and then collectively, that group of about 30 people, transformed. They were taken and they took themselves into their next expression, a deeper understanding, some changed behavior. So you want both transactional and transformational, but you want to be conscious and aware of what the difference is. So this is a toolkit day, since I'm not talking with a guest. So I don't want to go on and on and on, but I do want to give you enough that you can begin to think about and consider, what are you doing in your church or your spiritual community, and how much of it is transactional and how much of it is transformational. So if you're just starting out on your journey related to being inclusive, or maybe you've been at a plateau for a very long time and you're just beginning to bring up this idea of creating a stained glass spirit community, then you're going to have probably 75% of what you do transactional and 25% transformational, because you're going to have people in your community who are ready for major transformation, and they may be some of your key change agents. They may be some of the people who set the example. They may be some of the people who help you lead or plan events. But if the majority of your church members and guests are not accustomed to being inclusive or don't understand the spiritual motivation for being inclusive, then you have a lot of work to do, where you're sharing information in small bites, right? So maybe you do a Saturday morning conversation for 2 hours about what our spiritual belief system tells us to do, tells us to do or guides us to do in order to demonstrate gender equity. Or you might have a program or event for the Transgender Day of Visibility, right? And it's informational, and it is an opportunity to ask questions or to have some conversation. And in that sense, it's transactional. And you're piquing interest and you're helping people understand, what is it from a spiritual perspective that our teachings guide us, right? So you can take any topic and you can do that, and it is really important to do. But once you've done that more, you'll find that you might start switching to 50-50, 50% transactional and 50% transformational. So you may be doing some transactional activities or planning some transactional events where You are focused on a community I was working with not too long ago decided that they always do a potluck on a certain Sunday of the month. And they decided that for the next year, they were going to have a different cultural theme each month, and that they would encourage people to bring food or to decorate. The planning team would decorate the fellowship hall in a way that represented a specific culture. And then I don't think it was the very last one, I think it was like month 9, they were going to just do international and then have people bring whatever represented their culture or the culture of their personal ancestors. And so after, 7 or 8 months of doing this, focused on different themes or different cultures, that ninth, eighth or ninth one would really then allow people to talk about their own cultural, ethnic, or racial cultural background. And then, they'd be more comfortable doing that because they had had several months of just talking about culture in general. And that's transactional in general. For most people, that's going to be transactional. I'm learning about the food and the music that's playing in the background, the food and the music and some customs related to different cultures. I'm learning. And for a few people, it might be transformational because after 2 or 3 months, they may be like, I've never knew anything about this group or that group. And they get to be on fire about it. And then they go and start searching and researching. And then maybe that leads into building a bridge with people from different cultural norms in your own community and inviting them in. So it could develop to be transformational, but in general, that would be a transactional approach and an important one. Another example that comes to mind of how that works is that when you are doing transformational things, often they are related to culture, communication style, things like that. But it's not just race and gender, right? So, or it's not just race and ethnicity. So there are cultural norms in the way people communicate based on different aspects, right? So there is opportunity for you to do transactional events, classes in the form of maybe a one-time workshop or a two-part workshop. So that people get more information. And that could be about different professions, that could be about sexual orientation, that could be about people with disabilities. I, about a year ago, had the opportunity to work with a group that was committed to pay more attention to how they were set up to provide education and engagement with people with disabilities. And so, it's like, oh, well, if you want to be able to provide in your service engagement with people who are deaf or hard of hearing, then what are you going to do differently? If you want to make sure that people who are using a wheelchair for mobility are able to get in and out of your church, what do you need to do? How are you going to be prepared for someone who is blind? And if they're blind and using the cane, that's one thing. If they're blind and they are using a dog for guidance as they go through your church, are you prepared for that? And so it was fabulous because the people who were part of this team from this church they completely understood that it couldn't be transactional if they were going to really market that this was something they were prepared for, but they had to do a series of transactional things to learn more and to get resources and to prepare. And so they did that, but they were also smart enough to know that they needed to do that with the membership. So they included some educational activities and programs in educational piece that was so important. They were able to build a bridge from being transactional to being transformational by going from simply education or looking up things on the internet or using ChatGPT to do some research, and to move from that to engaging a group of people in designing what needed to happen. And over the course of that, especially the small group that was in the lead, it transformed the way they understood people with different disabilities, but it also transformed the church because as they moved from transactional to transformational, right, more and more people got involved. And then they did something that I thought it wasn't my idea. I wish I could say it was my idea. It will be my idea when I work with other communities. But in that particular community or church, they had an idea of, as they were moving from transactional to transformational, they went to the community college. And the community college had students who were learning American Sign Language. And so they developed a partnership. And the students who were studying, they were providing translation and they were communicating in American Sign Language even before the church began to market that they were making this available. And it was really done in a way that members of the community, members of the church, became accustomed to someone being on the platform who was signing what was being said. And then once they had done that for a couple of months, then they actually went and found people and organizations that were serving people who are deaf and asked them if they would come and visit the church and give feedback about what they could be doing and what they could be doing better. And they did the same thing related to people who use wheelchairs and people who are blind. So by the time they really incorporated it into their website, by the time they incorporated it into some of their print marketing materials, and by the time they incorporated this into their social media, they had been transformed. It had become transformation. So my key point today is really just to remind you that you need to do all kinds of things, right? If you are becoming an inclusive church or an inclusive spiritual community, just make sure that you think about where you are in the readiness for transformation and choose the transactional activities that you do in a way that they help you build to transformation. My name is Tracy Brown. I hope that some of this just really resonated with you or hit you or in like a gut punch, like, oh yeah, I need to do that. or just inspired you to think about this a little bit more. And next Tuesday at noon Mountain Time, I'll be back with you, encouraging you to continue to think about this topic and what you can do to be a stained glass spirit community. I'll see you then.
Thanks for watching The Inclusive Church with Tracy Brown. Join us again next week at 12 noon Mountain Time.